Hi, welcome to the Sales Compensation Show, the podcast where revenue leaders and sales compensation experts break down the strategies that drive performance. At Forma.ai, we recently hosted RevOps Kickoff 2025, a digital conference designed for revenue operations leaders, covering the most pressing challenges in GTM alignment and strategy. The response was incredible, and we didn't want these valuable discussions to be locked away in a one-time event. So we're interrupting our regular programming to bring you special episodes of our show, featuring the RevOps Kickoff Live panels. Different from our usual one-on-one deep dives, these episodes capture live panel discussions with top RevOps executives and industry leaders, tackling the most critical revenue challenges together. The fifth episode in our series of RevOps Kickoff panels looks at career advancement and the path to VP of RevOps. Our speakers reflect on their journeys to VP and actionable tips for qualities they would expect to see in future RevOps leaders. Listen in as Jen Pepper, Director of Content Marketing at Forma.ai, sits down with Andy Mowat, VP of RevOps at Carta, Danny Schonfeld, VP of RevOps at Glia, and Esther Friend, VP of RevOps at Udemy.
So to kick us off, I'd like to know, what does your day-to-day look like as a RevOps leader? And when you made it into this position, how did your goals change? How did your day-to-day change? Danny, I'd love to hear from you first.
Sure. Yeah. I'd say my day-to-day really involves just working across and having a pulse on every aspect of the go-to-market business, right? It's one of the fun parts of the job is that no day is ever the same. But it typically involves some sort of working to monitor key metrics across marketing, sales, and CS, constantly review the ICP of the business, ensure that our systems and data are working and adding value, really blending that forward-looking strategy with the operational execution to keep the lights on for the business and the go-to-market engine humming. Since everything we do is cross-functional all day, it is always complicated and never boring as far as so it's a little bit dynamic depending on the time of year as well, whether I'm business planning or trying to get ahead of many of those initiatives that we know are going to help continue the business moving forward over time. As far as goals in the role related to that, it really involves a mix of long-term and short-term objectives, right? The long-term goals is really posing these big business problems and building the foundations to set that sustainable growth, set long-term and short-term targets, right? And then help execute against that plan, which brings me to the short-term, helping the business achieve current year targets, keep the lights on, monitor signals, build an ongoing review cadence, use all of that to inform what we're doing on a day-to-day perspective.
Nice. Yeah, it's super dynamic. It's changing all the time, and it's very, very fast-paced and depends on the size of the org. Andy, I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, I've got about 50, 60 people underneath me. I think a lot of my role is hiring great directors. Plus, I think a lot about like what is that director level skill set and then empowering them. I just dropped in a fun article I wrote on like what is a director, which at Box they taught us, and it was really powerful. I think a lot of it, I always try to have like 2 or 3 things that I'm trying to inflect at any given time. And then a lot of my role involves like seeing stupid stuff about to happen and stopping that stuff, tackling when you get a new senior level stakeholder, like you're like, I'm going to spend a lot of time helping you understand how my team works, how we can wire in, and then really aligning on strategic priorities. And then I go deep on like 2 or 3 things at a time. But I've gotten to this place where I'm lucky enough to have built out that team of really solid leaders underneath me. And so like the day-to-day is very varied for me, which is both fun and sometimes can sink you. And then there's a lot of the strategy side as well too.
Yep, absolutely. I love what you said about, deputizing the others on your team, making.
I will say there's like this, I have this passion. I'd be curious, Esther and Danny, how they think, but I think a lot about like, I still like to keep my hands dirty. And at this level, sometimes you don't get to do that. So that's why I tend to do things on the side or help people out. But it's like, we know we can do those things, but we shouldn't do them because it'll disempower our team. And so that's been an interesting thing that I kind of had to let go 2 jobs ago was I can't get my hands as dirty on this, but I think I can be in the meetings and share my opinions, but I can't actually touch the systems anymore.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective. Anyone else jumping in on that?
Yeah, actually, Andy, that reminds me of something I read, and I think Keith Rabkin was the one that posted it. He's the CRO at Paradoc. and I don't know if this is his original idea or if this is something else that's more broad, but it's the idea of being a T-shaped leader. A broad oversight, strategy is your main focus, but then you might dive down on very specific initiatives that are really important to understand what's happening and really, work with the team more specifically on a few key things. But, mostly you're kind of focused on the strategy and execution overall. Uh, I think that's a good analogy because I think there are some areas where, like let's say there's an emerging go-to-market area that we want to focus on. And like data quality might be an example. Like I might need to help my team and guide them along and dive in for a brief period of time and then, step back out. But it's more kind of diving in on those very specific things that are key priorities, not being in the weeds every day and certainly not like configuring the systems myself.
Uh,
Yeah, and
That really,
with
that really resonates. Like it can get boring if you're just at the high level all the time. And data was exactly like we were struggling with the contracts, having to recut them, and going deep into that. It is so you got to be willing to get deep, especially early. Like you're onboarding, you're 6 weeks in, right? You gotta get your hands really dirty early. I think that's where leaders at the VP level can struggle if they stay too high level too early. But there's a balance for sure.
I think about it as managing at scale, larger teams with more diverse roles, right? It means that you do need to be able to rely on those individuals. I totally agree. Depth is still important, but we have to be a lot more selective of where we go deep. I cut my teeth as a data analyst and still have a pretty strong fondness for that. But agreed, it doesn't necessarily mean that's where I should spend all my time being quite as knowledgeable in specific systems and certain reports. But I need to know how to access the information dynamically to be able to just be informed and be that advisor to the exec team.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, totally. Knowing enough to be dangerous in all of these areas, but being the orchestrator of all of the things, right?
Sometimes it's okay too to hire people that know more than you, right? Like I just recently hired a terrific head of enablement. Like I've always managed that, but I've never been in the weeds with like instructional design, and so it's like you've got to be okay not knowing everything sometimes at this level.
Yeah, totally. Empowering the others on your team. Esther, you might have been jumping in there.
Yeah, I think, Andy, something I always think about is, when I'm hiring, I'm trying to hire that person that could replace me and that has the potential, um, and that they might know more than me in a lot of areas. And I think that's a great thing. Like you have to take risks as as a leader, say, okay, I'm going to get this person in that's very ambitious and embrace that. You know what I mean? The best people I've had are the ones that push me too. So I love that. And when you can learn from your team members, it's awesome.
Absolutely. And speaking of those team members, so many folks tuning in might have aspirations to get to that VP of RevOps role. And while advancing your career is great, we've talked about it in the pre-chat, you've really got to be ready, right? So part of this is demonstrating those hard skills and knowing you have them long before you make that leap. So in your view, what competencies and hard skills separate director level from VP RevOps? What do you need to demonstrate or be showing within your org? Esther, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things is having a leadership mindset. So being able to pull yourself out of the weeds and thinking about your company's strategy and thinking of yourself as like, if I were the owner of this company, how would I approach things? And you need to be thinking about decisions from a broader perspective across the go-to-market and not just looking at one aspect. So I think the strategic side and then also how do you navigate working with those other teams? So if you want to be successful in that role, you're going to have to work hand in hand with marketing, for example, and building those relationships. I think oftentimes directors can neglect, like they're in this silo world and not understanding, well, what motivates my peer over here in this team? And having, I think, more understanding of what each of them are focused on and then being able to drive alignment so that we're working towards the same goals, because that's when you're going to get the most leverage from a go-to-market standpoint is when you have the alignment, especially at the goal level. So like for the year, for the quarter, et cetera. So that like from an ABM standpoint, if you just had your sales team focused on these accounts and your marketing team focused on a different set of accounts, it's really not going to give you the impact that you're hoping for. So you really have to be very collaborative and I think aligned at the hip with peers in other areas to be at VP level. or successful VP level.
Yeah, that's bang on.
So I would add, I agree with the operating cross-functionally. We do that more so if my directors typically aligned to a specific function. The thing I would add is we also just spend a lot more time with, and therefore need to synthesize work for an executive level audience, typically advising, right, more senior C-suite level leaders. Not only does that require the go-to-market expertise and being able to operate across those functions, but also with how the business operates outside of go-to-market, right? For a more broadly informed point of view. So for instance, I work extremely closely with our finance organization as well, and need to know what's going on with the product org, not in the same level of detail as certain other individuals, but certainly more so than the directors on my team. So it's one thing I would add along with the cross-functional nature of the position.
I'd plus one to everything Esther and Danny said. I'd say two to add would be the ability to force trade-offs is something I see a lot of people struggle with at like the pre-director level. I often take calls from people and say, I'm swamped, I'm overloaded. And I'm like, there is a solve for that. I remember at a prior company, one of my team was just, they kept getting beat up, right? And I was like, okay, I'm gonna sit in this meeting for 4 weeks. And, after the first week, it was like, they kept saying, yes, I got it. And I think the right answer is awesome. It's number 8 on the list. Here's the 7 things above it. Do you disagree? We're happy to have a conversation. And you got to have an opinion. You've got to force prioritization, and then you have to help people understand the scarcity of the resources. And I think that's something that people generally aren't very good at until they get to a senior level. So that'd be one. And then I'd say intellectual flexibility, right? Like you're going to have things that you're going to disagree with. You're going to have to debate out. They may be strategic things that don't quite make sense, but you've got to be able to deal with like that level of structure and ambiguity sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Both resonates in terms of the ambiguity that you're talking about, but also kind of forcing some of those decisions or being able to illustrate some of the trade-offs, as you're saying, to get decisions made, right? And show up to the table in that way and be able to make that happen. Totally agree. So you had shared that there are many different paths to running RevOps, and yet there's kind of a base curriculum that you need for all it encompasses today. So you need to know about go-to-market architecture, sales and marketing ops, an understanding of key sales metrics, and SaaS 101 in many cases. So what RevOps superpowers are really in demand right now? Danny, maybe I'll throw it to you.
So in demand right now brings me to some of the changes that have happened in the market as well that come to mind from the question. One is that SaaS valuations aren't what they used to be. That's not a secret, right? Which requires a greater focus on efficient growth versus the more legacy grow at all costs mindset. So I think being an effective RevOps leader today means certainly still prioritizing growth and knowing what's important, but doing so in a more efficient, maybe pragmatic way with more emphasis on ROI, potentially offshoring hiring to find great talent in other countries where there are really strong individuals and different costs of living. Learn those things by understanding financial metrics and the importance of those, and being able to bring that full breadth to the role and the conversation is very important. A second shift is that business models are becoming more dynamic and varied. If traditionally heavily oriented around seat-based licenses, I've seen now usage-based, unlimited license, combination, right? Think about the sales motions as well. It's not just enterprise sales motions. There's PLG, there's channel-driven sales. All of these things increase the complexity and associated sophistication of the role. And doing these or just exposing yourself to them helps stand out. And again, give you that differentiating point and associated superpower. The third one is the other change is no surprise that AI is taking over the world, right? And but not in the form of just, and I think about it not just as, well, how am I going to apply this to my day-to-day, but also in thinking about how is this going to make the organization more efficient? It can be using the well-known LLMs in our day-to-day or Gen AI being woven into many of the tools that we use, but figuring out what this means for improving the efficiency of the organization overall, how you're going to use it effectively in the tools that you have, I think is becoming more and more critical as a superpower in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. On all three. Um, Andy, any superpowers come to mind for you?
I think data is really important. Like, you can't have AI without data. You have to have great data, and I would break data into two parts. One is just the innovations that are happening with things like Clay, the ability to like have much smarter data for targeting and for leveraging outbound and strategies like that. And I think the modern data stack is really interesting. So I at Culture Amp, I got some great people that taught me, what a modern data stack was, what DBT and Fivetran and High Touch, and how all these things worked together. And I do believe that in 3 to 4 years, most of go-to-market or RevOps will be rebuilt on top of these tools, right? So I get really excited about things like Inflection.io or Clarify. It's like these systems we're using are clunky and terrible right now. And I envision a world which they're built on top of the data warehouse. They're much more flexible. And I think I generally say I won't hire people that don't know what SQL is, how to pull their own data, how to leverage that. So that's a skill set that I think is really emerging increasingly.
Nice. Yeah. Data and the ability to really analyze that data, but with new tools that are coming to the forefront for sure. How the tech stack is going to change and maybe being more ahead of that than other candidates sounds super, super important. Esther, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I was making my notes and then Danny covered a lot of the points and so did Andy, but I think, reframing to profitable growth where you are operating more leanly and looking at what can you automate. There's so many great tools that are out there in the market that are evolving so quickly. I think also being able to see, how can you support your strategy through a lot of those tools that can help automate or help, shorten the time frame for sales to do their research, account-based marketing, or I think now they're even calling it persona-based marketing, getting down to even a more granular level. A lot of the tools can help you do that much more effectively. And I think, a big onus on the revenue operations group is to make sure that sales can be very focused and that the sales time is focused on interacting with the customers, interacting with the prospects, and not a lot of this preparation time and, wasted time going between UIs. And it's evolving so quickly that you really have to be super proactive to see where things are going and make sure you're using the latest and greatest that's going to help them be most effective. Because I think, I've seen examples where, switching from one vendor to another, you might increase your meetings by like 80%. Well, that is huge if you think about funnel and opportunity and pipeline creation. So I would say that's a big area. And I think understanding the SaaS metrics and what the different levers are and thinking about your priorities through the lens of like, if I focus on this area, how much lift can I potentially get versus focusing on this other area and prioritizing, that's where you're going to get the biggest lifts.
Nice. And before we move on from this one as a follow-up, where do you best recommend folks identify their gaps in these areas and where should they go to fill them? Because some of it seems very on the job where you would figure that stuff out, but are there any communities or resources for some of the things that you recently brought up, the tech stacks, AI and advancements there, data, where should people be learning that stuff?
So I might just start this one off. I would say I'm executive member of Pavilion, which is all focused on go-to-market and primarily B2B SaaS. And I would say while a lot of the folks that are in there are not necessarily at the same company size as me, I would say a lot of them are smaller companies than mine. I've still found it very beneficial just as a group of peers to talk with. And, they have dinners, they have trainings like go-to-market architecture. They will host demo days for AI. So you can see like 10 vendors in 1 2-hour chunk instead of like doing this iteratively over time. But things like that help shorten the learning curve and where you can say, hey, is this like hype or is this real? I would also say I tend to get to know the executives at my vendors as well. And a lot of them have similar tech stacks to what we're using. So I'm constantly comparing notes like, hey, have you used this thing? What do you think? Was it better than the other thing? And you can get kind of the assessment of somebody else that's already doing it so that, is this worth pursuing or not? Because I can't tell you the volume of requests I get on a daily basis to look at new tools, and it's a lot of noise. So if you can kind of shorten the learning curve that way, I think it's super beneficial.
I'd tons of great ones from Esther. I'd say communities are great. RevOps, Co-op, WizOps, MoPros are good ones. I do find that they tend to be a little bit more junior in discussions. So I've kind of like built my own community with like VP of RevOps folks that we can have more discussions at a different level. I think a lot of people look externally, but like there's great options internally too, right? Like if you work at a company the size of like the ones we're all working at, I see a lot of people like, oh, I got to move to the next place to find my thing. But like I've watched people at CultureAmp, we had our head of MOPS and he's like, I want to build out more of a portfolio, right? And so we added SOPs to him. Chris, who's on the call, was running post-sale ops and he wanted to become more full funnel. So we gave him more pieces of SOPs. So I could get Carta, a really star person in MOPS wants to learn more about SOPs, right? So it's like, I think if you raise your hand and share with that leader, that's a great way to like expand and get projects in the other areas of ops and can learn as well too.
They said a number of great ones, so I'll try to add a couple of different ones, which is, I mean, you're consuming content, you heard from them, right? I listen to Esther and other sources that just help provide a pulse on the market. More important though, I'd say is my network. I spend a good amount of time investing in it, and Esther talked about the vendors or execs at vendors. For me, I've had a lot of colleagues at these companies who have different levels of expertise and have gone into these roles. One person comes to mind who was a marketing ops leader and is now came from the marketing ops role into a RevOps leadership role. I came from the sales ops side, as I mentioned, into the RevOps leadership role. We both have different perspectives. We make sure to talk regularly to be able. I had another one who was on the systems analytics side that's in a RevOps leadership role now. We all have different core skill sets, but in similar roles and facing similar challenges now, which just helps to have that dialogue around what's happening. You don't need to be in this position to be able to make those connections and reach out. Andy is clearly an example of this, but many of us love to pay forward the advice that we've gotten to help get here and are very eager to help share advice with others looking to get in similar positions.
That's so awesome. And as you said, kind of having that hype crew that you can talk to from your own network is really important, and keeping in touch with folks, whether it be on LinkedIn or, your own little Slack community that you are keeping up with, super, super important. Now, one thing I wanted to ask about is like at that VP level, the job hunt changes in that your next role is not going to come from a job board. Right. So can you share how you create opportunity for yourself, or how do you find out and keep your ear to the ground for those opportunities? How do those kind of come up? Because we know it changes.
Kind of why I'm building Whispered. It's the scariest thing when you pop your head up. It's scary, right? Your network is stale. Hopefully you've been in a role focused down for a while. The jobs at the senior levels are not posted. Every time somebody posts a VP of RevOps, they get absolute tons of applications and just get overwhelmed. And you don't really know how the game is played. It's a very different game at the executive level than it is at the junior level, right? Like you can work with talent partners, you can work with recruiters. I basically, I'll just drop the link in, but I've been building guides on this for the last 2 years. And so I'd say check out Whispered. And your network is nice, but it still can take a while to ramp that back up. And so when you're looking, it can be stressful. So I'll stop there, but I'm sure Esther and Danny have other thoughts too.
Yeah, so I'll just add to what you're saying. So I think there's stats out there that say that most roles, I think at this level, come from second degree connections. So it's not necessarily the person you know directly, but it's who they know. And I think that's definitely been true for me, where I wouldn't have heard about opportunities if I would, if I didn't have that person that was thinking about me and connected me with that other person in their network. And obviously I built that trust and confidence where they felt like I was someone worth recommending because I had delivered in the past. But I also would just add to Andy's comment about network. Like I think a lot of people get a job and then they forget all about networking until they're looking for another job. And that's a huge mistake. One, you're not really getting the learning that you would have from maintaining your network on an ongoing basis and leveraging your network in your current job. So, for that advice and to bounce ideas and things. But also then it's a major effort when you're going to like try to reestablish. So for me, I think it's always important to maintain my network all the time. And I would say, when I was job hunting, I probably attended more events than I usually would. Like I definitely normally wouldn't go to like 3 events in a week. But while I was figuring out where I wanted to go next, I definitely did more of those during that time. But I had been cultivating and nurturing my network that whole time when I was in my other jobs. So I think that's really important. And I would say don't see networking as this like scary thing. It's all about building relationships, and it's really, for me, it's super rewarding to give back to the network and for people to come to me advice. And sometimes it sharpens my own thinking too, to be able to talk about that with other people. I think can help you also form your own ideas about things. So that's my 2 cents.
I don't have a dramatically different answer from what they shared, so I'll build on the benefits of maintaining the network, which is not only in finding your own role, but also in finding great people to hire. At the end of the day, Andy said it earlier, that's the most important thing that we can do as leaders is hire great people. Good things usually tend to happen when you do that. And keeping those connections, monitoring someone's career growth, helping support them through it. Well, yes, there's a selfless aspect of it. There can also be some really positive returns down the line as part of that. So there are just so many reasons for why that's so important. And I fully agree with what the others shared.
Awesome. Then I want to throw one other comment in there too that kind of I see, some of my mentees and other people on my network who are looking for roles. And I think it's something people often overlook is I think you also have to know, like, what is your value? Like, do you have a specific skill set that would be attractive to certain types of companies because you've done certain things and you have a playbook that works, right? That you could take somewhere else. I think identifying what types of companies are the companies that would value that skill set the most. It might be based on the company size or a certain vertical. Like, let's say that you're really great at healthcare SaaS. Like, I think targeting, just like our go-to-market process where we're doing APN and we're targeting the ICP, you need to do the same thing with your job search and be very intentional and also think about like what's a culture where you're going to thrive that fits well with the way that you work so that you don't end up in the wrong spot where you're kind of stymied in terms of your growth. Because it's not all about just getting the title that you want or that role. It's about, is the place that you're going to have the right team that's going to make you successful? Are there people you can learn from? Do they have the right growth trajectory? There's a lot of things to think about. And I think it's important to be very intentional.
I love that in terms of being intentional. And I think we'll come back to a little bit more on what you were saying there towards the end, because I do want to put a pin in that. It's really, really important to, as you say, land in the right place and not just be taking anything because it's the role that you're interested in. So we'll talk a little bit about that further. A lot of the RevOps role is leading from the front, strategic thinking, bringing people together. So a lot of hard skills, soft skills combined, a lot of things that you build experience in on the job. And for those that you have seen successfully make the leap, what specific things did you see them do? And maybe it's you, maybe it's from personal experience, but what did you see them do to build their effectiveness? Anyone can jump in.
I'm almost thinking in reverse, which is what did the people that didn't make the leap that you wanted to make the leap, what did they struggle at? I think it kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier, right? It's the ability to make trade-offs, to engage at a strategic level, and to be intellectually flexible. Like those are the good ones can do it. I give a lot of coaching to like walk the floor, and I remember one person was like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "Oh, walk the floor." And so it's like there's so many. You gotta make time to engage with people and build relationships, and that's hard. If you're a junior, you're like, "I'm just doing my thing, I'm doing my thing," but a lot of that is that I probably spend 80% of my time on that 20% at the end, right? Like the wrapping it up, the bringing it forward versus the 80% on the doing. And so I think that's the difference at the senior levels. You're really trying to set the project up right and wrap it up right and deliver it right, less on the middle. And so I think that's a different mindset shift that people have to make.
Yeah, and Andy, just so I ask, what does it mean to walk the floor then? Like, what does that look like in practice?
walk over, see how they're doing, learn about them personally, care about them personally, strike a dialogue, ask about their weekend, remember the thing about the last time you talked about, bring them a piece of information, learn something, all of that.
Yeah. People are people.
Yeah.
What I've seen people do very well to get ahead and continue to grow their careers is to not just take direction, but set direction. We work with some very, we typically work with very experienced stakeholders who are experts in their field, but may not have the, I'll say, consulting style mindset of asking why certain things are happening, digging into root causes of issues, and will have on their mind, I need this problem solved right now, and go do it for me. And that's important to be able to do. And that is what a good RevOps hire does, I would say, is effective problem solving. What a great RevOps hire does is dictate the problems that should be solved as well. And that I can think of, a number of people who've worked with and for me who've done this very well, and how much they've grown in their careers as a result.
Just plus one of that, I think, is the ability to not just take an order, but to be able to be, cool, I heard what you're asking, but like, can I give you some additional options and maybe find a better solution? Like that's a very key skill set that Danny just outlined.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's kind of, I think, Danny, you mentioned this in our pre-chat. It's the difference between accepting the long list of things that people might come to you with and setting those priorities instead. I hear you, but, or just challenging some of the solutioning that is brought to you and say like, hey, actually, this is my recommendation, showing up to the table with those recommendations, with something to sell.
And at the same time, being open that maybe the first 5 times you do it, you're going to be told no, but that's fine, right? Even just giving yourself that opportunity to think in that way and push in that way could trigger something in your in your stakeholder's mind around where we should be focusing and where we should be going, and start to then treat you differently as a result, as a partner for leading that function or the business overall, versus as someone who's going to go and do whatever needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Esther,
Can I say something controversial on this topic? It
yeah,
maybe set it off, but it definitely got me thinking about it. I think it's going to be really hard to be a VP of RevOps remote. It does gall me every time I post something and I get blamed on LinkedIn for like, why are you not open to remote people? I totally get it if you're an IC, but it's pretty fucking hard. Sorry, it's pretty hard to walk the floor if you're remote. It's hard to build executive relationships. There are some companies like a Zapier that are fully remote, and I think in those cases you can do it. But I've personally found it very hard to be as effective there. And I think, Carta was 2 going to 3 days a week, and I loved it. I miss it. It's like and so I think some people will challenge me on that. They're like, oh yeah, absolutely. But I know we all took the genie out of the bottle for COVID and we hired the best people anywhere, and a lot of us moved to different places. But I think it's pretty damn hard to be an effective VP remotely. Maybe some of the other panelists are, but I just haven't been able to do it.
definitely tough. And I think that there's so many perspectives on this. I would like to throw it over to the other panelists to hear, has that been your experience? And
Yeah, I'd say in my last role, I was fully remote, but I would say I had meetings, probably, on a monthly basis. My largest stakeholders were the sales folks, and they're all out in the field. So I would go to like the meetings with them when they had their summit in Las Vegas or Park City or whatever. I would go back to headquarters probably on a monthly basis. I would gather my team in person a couple times a year. I would say it's possible. I think you have to be very intentional. And you do have to establish those connections. We had our in-person sales kickoff and things like that helped build those relationships. And I also think it depends on what tech stack you had. Like we use Slack very heavily, and I would have savvy leaders reaching out to me, and I was very approachable, so they knew that was that we could connect and follow up. So I'd say I think it can work in both models. Now I'm in a hybrid environment where I'm in the office 2 days a week, but frankly, my team is global. I have some people that are in Denver with me. I have others that are in San Francisco. I have others around the world, APAC, everywhere. So I think you just have to be intentional and you have to be thoughtful about how you do things. Then you have to be inclusive, especially when you're global. So we have meetings that are APAC friendly. We have meetings that are EMEA friendly so that you get kind of the full representation as part of your initiatives that you're focused on.
No, I like it. I've got Rio and APAC and at Culture Amp. We read like APAC in Europe and New York and everything. I think Carta, we have like 15 global offices. I do think it's like, where are the CRO, the CMO, the CEO, the head of finance? Like if you're not seeing those people on a regular basis, it does get a little bit harder to wire into them strategically, is definitely what I've found.
So yeah, look, I've been remote for 5 years now in this role, and coincidentally, it started blizzarding outside my window, and just right when Angie said it was going to be controversial, I don't know if that's a sign, but I think it is heavily dependent on the culture of the organization, right? If you are the person who's remote when everyone else is meeting in person, that's going to be difficult no matter the role. At the same time, if the company culture is set up such that it is remote, I think it's certainly feasible and just gives you access to so much more variety of talent, especially if a smaller organization which doesn't have the brand that some of the bigger ones do. It having that can become a competitive advantage and can outweigh the benefits of being in person as well, of finding the best people you can anywhere in the world, regardless of whether they can come into an office or not. So there are certainly trade-offs and that are more in thinking. I do think in a remote world, though, you have to be more deliberate in making time and setting time for the unproductive conversations, which tend to be, indirectly more productive than many of the productive conversations or agenda-oriented conversations, so that you can still manufacture those personal relationships.
Yeah. Intentionality, because, there's no water cooler or coffee to be, talking around. So we have to kind of make that more intentionally or deliberately. So I love that perspective. There's one thing I also want to ask about. We've talked about how it's tougher for the person maybe in the VP RevOps role when it is remote, right? And that might be people's experience. But I want to ask about, if you are looking to kind of make the leap into a VP role, working remotely, what are some things that you can maybe be doing internal, not necessarily looking, for your next role external, but if you were looking to make the leap internal while it is remote, what might that look like to be, raising your hand, and what could you be doing to gain the reputation and the hard skills?
I think a big one would be volunteering yourself for cross-functional projects. So, I think if your company has certain initiatives that are priority initiatives and let's say you're a director and you could volunteer yourself, like, hey, I would like to take the lead on this and represent our team and things like that. I think that's a really good way to get more, access and facilitate those relationships across the company. I would definitely say that as one example.
I would add just becoming known for something that's very high priority for the business. If there's a big initiative or expanding into a new segment or even a tool that everyone relies on and needs information from, and you are the person who knows that better than anyone, people are going to come to you to ask questions, and that's a really important and powerful position to be in, no matter where you sit.
I love those. I guess I don't know how to articulate it, but it's like, crush what you're doing and win the hearts of your execs. Like at Box, I joined to run post-sale ops, and I got the call from the CEO. He's like, I hear you're good. Can you run MOPS? At Culture Amp, when people depart, there's interesting opportunities that pop up, right? At Culture Amp, I was running RevOps and marketing departed, and so I ended up taking over demand gen. And at Carta, I ended up picking up all the business systems team as well too, right? So it's like, though, if you're really, really good at what you do, and you've got the confidence of senior execs, like, you're going to be the first on the list when, rather than looking externally, they're going to look at you as well too.
Yep. Be so good they can't ignore you.
Yeah.
So, you've got the skills, the reputation, the backing internal. Now you're kind of evaluating a RevOps role somewhere, right? It might even be in your current organization. But what are some red flags in maybe the interview process or job descriptions? What should folks be on the lookout so that you're not taking on a bad situation in a new org? And I'm going to throw it to Esther because I feel like you did this most recently of this group.
So I, recently was very selective about where I was going and evaluating lots of companies. And I would say it is very important to pay attention to the words that they use for what the priorities for the role are. I had one role that this was a new role for the company. They were combining these different functions to make a RevOps, VP RevOps role. And the company, the CEO had described in the what are they looking for to police the use of the CRM was one of the phrases. And I thought, okay, this is an indication that maybe this isn't a good match for me. I would say my focus is much more on a carrot and enablement standpoint for sales and let's help them do the right behaviors by showing them how this is more successful than a compliance environment where we're you have to put all your activities in the CRM. Hey, how about I just automate the activities into the CRM and then we don't have to tell them, you need to write your notes, So I would say that was a big warning flag to me. I'm nope, that's not the company for me. Or even from a culture standpoint, another company that I said, well, your Glassdoor is a little alarming. What do you think about that? And the SVP of sales said, well, I wouldn't say that we're a warm culture. I just said that directly. I was okay, well, that's probably not the place for me. So I think you have to be brave and ask questions that might be uncomfortable questions where you might be kind of ending the road with a company, but knowing that that's probably not the place for me. I'm not going to be happy there. So you have to be very clear-eyed and I think direct and really read the Glassdoor, read the G2 crowd. No, is this a good product that we're going to be selling? Because you can have the greatest go-to-market all the systems, the process, the metrics, blah, blah, blah. But if you have a terrible product, you're probably not going to succeed. So I would say do a lot of due diligence is my advice.
Great advice. Yeah, it has to be a mutual fit. And there are some red flags out there. Anyone else?
I care deeply about who I work for. I just dropped an article on that, but I care that I'm wired into them. They understand the function that I do and that they're there to amplify me. And so I spend a lot of time on that. I think how decision-making is made within GTM is really important for RevOps people. Personally, I would not take a role where marketing and sales and CS all roll up to different people and I can't force those decisions. And then I'm looking for the breakout companies and the ability to kind of find, because it's you can be great, but if you don't pick the company that's also doing well, and you're growing at a certain rate, it can be tough. And so I think those are you can have lots of criteria, but those are the three that I use almost every time.
I think it's totally fair to ask for metrics of how the business is performing, even if private, sign an NDA if you need to, but it's a fair question. And if it's a company that's open to not necessarily sharing everything, but sharing what is going to give you that signal of whether it will be a breakout company is fair. A couple that I did see in my past was reluctance to let you talk to important stakeholders. If there is a head of one of the function, I have a phenomenal post-sales partner. So he knows I'm not talking about him, but a phenomenal post-sales partner, or if they won't, you say, oh, can I speak to this stakeholder? And there's some reluctance or not part of the interview panel. I think that's an important sign. Another is just dodging discussing plans to invest in the RevOps org. You might be an early hire as they're building the function, but at the VP level, you should expect to be able to bring in or work with experts in different functions. That comes with an understanding of what a VP of RevOps is and can do. You don't necessarily need your leader to have an outlined vision of what it looks like. That's often why they're hiring you, but recognizing that it's a broader investment and not a one-person show. Last one, this isn't for RevOps specifically, but I remember interviewing for a company that scheduled interviews on back-to-back Saturdays because the team was too busy during the week, which was more just a sign of the company's culture.
I love Danny's on the org structure. When I joined Carta, this COO was incredibly thoughtful, right? They spent 3 weeks building the org chart, designing it, getting my input. And sometimes I think we've all come into RevOps orgs where it's figure it out. And I think if you've got somebody who really cares about the org structure and is thoughtful, like that, that is really important as well too.
Oh man, these answers are so revealing and I think very helpful for our audience in terms of what to look for next. There was a great question that came in the Q&A that I want to ask you as well. We've got a little bit more time. But for someone more excited to contribute as an IC, I think this is really important for like an IC track. Is there a way to climb the ladder in RevOps by taking on more strategic responsibility without necessarily a lot of people management responsibility? So this person says, not entirely allergic to people management, but at times when I've stepped up, it felt like I actually got further from the actual RevOps strategy. So I'll throw that over to anyone who wants to take that question.
If you want to be a VP at a company bigger than $10 million in revenue, I think you need to know how to really manage people. My first time was hard. You get better at it, but the only way you get better at these things is by practicing and learning. And it actually becomes really fulfilling at some point if you do it right. And you can take some arrows sometimes when you make hard people decisions, but I would not avoid that. At the same time, RevOps is a place where you can have leaders that only have 2 or 3 or 4 people versus huge teams. So I think you have to embrace it if you're on this call and you want to be VP of RevOps sometime, like take those arrows early, learn how to be a manager.
I generally agree. I think it's part of climbing corporate ladder, if you will. That said, I have seen a couple of posts and content about this like go-to-market engineer role or growth strategist, which does seem like a maybe growing path for someone who wants to be embedded in the go-to-market organization and structure and strategy in a way that maybe more companies are carving out, or if you even have an idea for this and know a leader or a company that you want to work for pitching on this role and what it could bring, and starting out as a contractor, for instance, and just kind of defining what a new innovative role could be, monitoring where the industry is going.
Nice. Yeah. We did have a clarification come in that said, I realized people management would be part of it, but how to ensure it doesn't get in the way of strategic leadership. Anything further on that?
Hire great people, coach them, mentor them, amplify them. Like if you're spending a ton of your time, I mean, it should be amplifying for you and for them if you've got great people. And if you don't, that's the start that I screwed up early in my career. Make the hard calls. Like if they're not the right person, don't be the crutch for them forever.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to kind of Andy, what you had said about hiring the person that is almost further ahead than you hoped, right? They come in and they're just so good. And you're like, yes, like don't be afraid of hiring that person who's a step or two ahead of even where you feel you are at that time.
I've learned, one of my all-star people that I hired and I keep trying to hire again and again, brilliant, but was very frictionful early in the thing. And I sat down with this person and had a conversation at like week 4 and gave some incredibly direct feedback, and it changed. And it was like, and so like, that's the things that you have to learn as a leader, right? Like, when can you give advice? I always give the speech of, at about 90 days, when you move to a new town, you will stop trying new restaurants. You'll try everything. And then at some point, so your relationship is there, right? And it's a lot of those nuances of how to work with people. And so I gave somebody, as I was leaving Carta, like, go have that chat with somebody, define your relationship, have those hard combos. And so like, those are things you got to learn. And I wouldn't avoid those things.
Nice. Yeah, agreed. Someone has also asked, what is the best way for director level to get broader scope beyond a certain functional area? So sales ops, enablement, to get experience for a VP role. Does anyone want to take that one?
Well, so I think back to what I said earlier, like you need to be curious about what those other groups are doing. So let's say you're in sales ops and you're probably working a lot with marketing ops, like getting more curious about, well, what metrics do they care about? Like maybe take some courses on marketing ops related topics. When I was already VP at Five9, I was doing a lot of joint projects with our CMO, and a lot of them were starting to cross over into demand gen and ABM and things like this. And I thought, well, I'm going to take the Pavilion CMO course so that I can think like a CMO, like what's she thinking about? What are the metrics she cares about? And I could tell you it had a huge impact. One, I got to know all these CMOs who are now part of my network and I can ask them questions. But two, I learned like, what are all the metrics they care about? What are the vendors they're thinking about? What are the pitfalls, attribution, all these things so that I could be a more valuable business partner to her, to our CMO. And then, that helped me get more involved in a lot of the joint initiatives with marketing operations to now, I have marketing operations is under my umbrella. So I'd say be curious about it, find out what matters in that space, follow thought leaders in that space. I have some awesome people I follow on LinkedIn for marketing, for example. And that just really helps me be more thoughtful and a better collaborator with them. And then for people to see that, hey, you have that expertise, you know what I mean? I can add a lot more value in those conversations.
I mentioned this individual who I worked with in a prior role, who he was marketing ops lead, I was sales ops lead. We both went into our respective roles. We spent an hour with each other just talking about each of our functions and what some things to watch out for, and kept the conversation going. So it's been really a really healthy partnership over the years as a result. The other thing is there's no shortage of work to do, and I'm definitely a learn by doing person. So not that we have all this excess time around, but if you are ambitious and you want to be able to accelerate quickly, then it is very likely that your marketing ops partner, if you're in sales ops or whatever, is looking for some support and can absolutely help get you exposure. And that's a great way to be able to just get your hands dirty and see what sort of problems come up. And, virtually everything we do is cross-functional in nature. So there's probably a way to shoehorn it into whatever function you are running.
Absolutely. Yeah. It sounds like really connecting with other people in the org and showing them that you care about and understand what they are doing, as Esther said. And then Danny, everything you just said, +1. It's like all of that is super, super important. We do have 2 minutes, so this one's going to have to be fast. But alongside, Andy, you had said have those tough conversations, hire the best people. Don't be afraid of like those feedback, difficult conversations and things like that. But other than that, like what is your top advice for people management for RevOps ICs, especially for new managers? If you have one tidbit for new managers.
Teach them how to manage up early. The way you interact with somebody will change. I'd meet with the new hire every single day for half an hour at the end of every day. I will know at the end of week 2 if they're a good hire or not. And if they are, we're building that relationship, we're building that dialogue. And so I'm a big fan of the concept of managing up.
I think also back to Andy's earlier point, being comfortable giving feedback, and you see something going awry with that person, you have to be willing to give the feedback and give it early versus like letting it fester. I think that's one of the biggest things as a manager is you have to have difficult conversations with people, but also I think they're very receptive if they understand that your purpose is to help them grow and be more successful and continue to develop. Then I think, they're a lot more receptive to that if you can provide the right context and give feedback in the right way. I think some people have read like Radical Candor and they take it totally the wrong way of like, I got to be mean. That's not what it's about. So you can be helpful and thoughtful in how you give feedback, but you've got to do it.
Absolutely. And that is a great recommendation, book recommendation.
I'll be very quick. Throw them in the deep end with a life raft. So like I mentioned, learning by doing, but give them a difficult project. Don't expect perfection. Be there to support, but that's also a great way to show how they're going to respond. And if they're coming to you with questions and with challenges that are coming up, and hey, here's a barrier that I'm working through, and I've seen a lot of like, well, okay, I'm going to ease you in and just kind of give you a month of PowerPoint text to sit through versus here's your project. You can figure it out. You have resources. Here are the resources to go and do it and see how they respond.
Absolutely. Yep. I like what you said there about the life raft.
Yeah.
So it's all super, super important stuff. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. It was awesome having all of you.
The Sales Competition Show is brought to you by Forma.ai, the sales performance management platform that fully integrates sales planning with rapid, scalable incentive compensation management. Our data platform brings together how you can plan and manage the entire lifecycle of territories, quotas, and incentives. With global customers like Autodesk, Stryker, and Hootsuite, we enable go-to-market teams to plan and deploy even the most complex SPM strategies at speed, taking you from idea to execution instantly. To learn more about Forma.ai, visit our website at Forma.ai. Hit the subscribe button and find more episodes of this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Thanks for tuning in.